day, Junior Tikkies. I'm Mrs. Brimmerblom. We are now going to look at Activity 3 on Inventories, Chapter 8. Concepts. Choose the stock system method from the list provided that best described each statement below. So if we now look at question 3.1.1, similar value, low-cost stock items are valued by taking into account the total cost of an item divided by the number of items available for sale. This is the weighted average method. Question 2. The closing stock value of goods determined by assuming that the goods bought first are sold first is FIFO, first in, first out. Number 3, cost of sales is recorded at the point of sale of stock records are adjusted accordingly. This is the perpetual inventory system, and another word for that is the continuous inventory system. Question 4. The closing stock figure to be used to calculate the cost of sales is determined by a physical stock count at the end of the accounting period. This is the periodic inventory system. And question number 5, sales and cost of sales records are maintained for the individual items sold due to these being high value goods. This is using specific identification. Again, this is the theory that you need to make sure that you study with regards to inventory systems. A reminder, we have the periodic and the perpetual inventory system. Within those systems, we can choose how do we want to evaluate our stock. Activity 1, the focus was on first in, first out. Activity 2 was on weighted average. And now activity 3 is going to be based on specific identification. So if we look now at question 3.2, Water Fund Limited. Water Fund Limited sells jet skis which are imported from Mexico. The owner is Jolly Fox. The financial year ended 28 February 2022. The business makes use of the perpetual inventory system and value their stock according to specific identification method. We're going to approach this activity the same way as we've done the previous 2 activities. I'm going to show you the workings with regards to the trading account based on a periodic inventory system. The reason why I do the trading account is because from there, I can calculate the value of the closing stock. I can calculate the cost of sales. I can calculate the gross profit. I can calculate if there are any missing items. So it's just one way of getting to the answers that I need. If we look at the trading account, we would always have opening stock plus purchases plus carriage on purchases plus any other additional cost minus the closing stock. Remember, that equals the cost of sales. On the credit side, we have sales. So now if I take sales plus closing stock minus everything on the debit side, it will provide us with the gross profit. This is just to recap. Now, if we look at the information given, remember that we are busy with specific identification. So we need to look at each item individually. Starting with X thousand, double, that's the module. We've got 15 units in the beginning. The cost is 50,000 per unit. The total is given to me 450,000. Plus the purchases. The cost is 50,000. 80 units were purchased, and if you look at the additional information, there were no returns with regards to the jet skis purchased from the supplier. But if we look now at sales, units sold 95, but 2 items, 2 jet skis were returned by customers due to various reasons. This means that my sales is going to be 95 minus 2. That equals the number of jet skis that were sold. To calculate the to calculate the closing stock, 15 plus 80 minus 93 means 2 jet skis is available. Now we can calculate our gross profit. Take the credit side minus the debit side equals the gross profit. If we look at the next model, X700, opening stock, 8 jet skis, and the cost was 22,000. Purchases, 200 jet skis were purchased. But if you look at the additional information, 15 jet skis were damaged during transport and had to be written off. The insurance covered the damages. This transaction was not recorded. So we need to show that 15 jet skis were damaged and written off. This is why we're going to take 200 minus 15, the number of jet skis, 185. To calculate the sales, 180 were sold. It's 70% markup percentage, which means we need to take the cost times 170 divided by 100 to get a selling price. There were no returns by customers. This is why we're going to take 180 times the selling price. To work out the closing stock, opening stock plus the net purchases minus the sales equals my closing stock. Now we can calculate the gross profit on this item specifically by taking the total sales on that specific item plus the closing stock on that specific item minus the opening stock minus the purchase equals the gross profit. If we look at the next module or model, I have X2000 power up. There were no opening stock. Purchases 150. And then we've got sales 135 were sold, but 8 of those items were returned by customers due to various reasons. It means that in my purchases, we're going to say 150 times the cost. Sales, we have to work out the selling price. If the markup is 150%, we need to take times 100 divided by times 150 divided by 100. So the number of units sold, 127 times the selling price. To work out the closing stock, it's the purchases minus the sales equals my closing stock. Once I've got the closing stock, I've shown the sales, we can calculate the gross profit by taking the credit side, which means sales plus the closing stock minus the purchases equals my gross profit. To work now out what is my total opening stock, we are going to add those two together, the number of units plus the total amount. My purchases, 80 plus 185 plus 150 equals the number of units. The same with the amount, we're going to add all of that together to get the total purchases. To calculate our total sales, we're going to add all of that together, the number of units. That equals the total sales of jet skis, and that is the total amount by adding all of that together to calculate the value of my closing stock. The number of units, 2 plus 13 plus 23 equals, and to get the amount, we're going to do exactly the same by adding all of that together. Now we can calculate the gross profit. To calculate the gross profit, take the credit side minus the debit side. Remember that we're not going to add those things in a different color. We're only going to look at the total minus opening stock minus total purchases equals the total gross profit. So looking now at completing this without looking at the trading account, we need to calculate the value of the closing stock. When we're looking at specific identification, like we've done before, we're going to look at each item specifically. This means that units, opening stock, 15, plus 80 units were purchased, minus 93. And what do we need to times it with? With the cost, 50,000. So 2 times 50,000 equals 60,000. If we look now at X700 Lite, opening stock plus the number of units purchased minus the damaged jet skis during the transport that needs to be written off, minus the number of units that were sold equals 13 units available times the cost. If we look at X2000, there were no opening stock, 150 minus 138, but 8 units were returned. So we actually only sold 127. That equals 23, which is left over. What do we need to times it with? With the cost. If we look at what is the total value of our closing stock, we're going to add the 60,000 plus 286,000 plus 874,000. When we compare this to the trading account, you would get exactly the same answer. Right, looking now at question 3.2.2. Calculate the cost of sales for the financial year. So again, we need to look at each one specifically. Starting with X1000, opening stock 450,000, plus purchases 2.4 million, minus the closing stock, which we calculated in the previous question, equals my cost of sales. Looking at X700 Lite, my opening stock 176,000. But now remember, 15 jet skis were damaged. This means we need to take 200 minus the 15 that were damaged, and then we times it by the cost. That equals my net purchases. Next, we need to subtract the closing stock, which we calculated in the previous question. That equals cost of sales. Looking at X2000, there were no opening stock, so we're going to take the total purchases minus my closing stock calculated in the previous question. That equals my cost of sales. To get the total cost of sales, we need to add all of those together, and that equals my total cost of sales. Now looking at another option, how to calculate the cost of sales. if you've completed the trading account, I can get the cost of sales by taking my opening stock plus purchases minus my closing stock. Or you can take your sales minus the gross profit equals cost of sales. So if I look at each one specifically, sales minus the gross profit equals cost of sales, x 700. Again, we're taking sales minus gross profit equals cost of sales. For the x 2000, sales minus gross profit equals cost of sales. Now we can look at the total. If we take the total sales and we minus the total gross profit, we will get the total cost of sales. And if you add all of those together, it equals exactly the same answer. So the idea again is to show you the different ways how to get to the answer. Use what works for you. If we look at the trading account, remember the instruction set. The trading account is based on a perpetual inventory system, which means sales minus cost of sales equals the gross profit, which is closed off to the profit and loss account. We've already calculated our total cost of sales, so we're going to fill it in immediately. My total sales needs to be calculated. The cost is 50,000 times 145 divided by 100 equals the selling price. If you look, 95 units were sold, but 2 were returned. So we need to take 93 times the selling price. Looking at X 700, the cost is 22,000 to work out the selling price. The markup is 70%, therefore 170 divided by 100 equals the selling price. 180 units were sold times the selling price equals the total sales for that item. If we look at X 2000 power up, the cost is 38,000, the markup 50%, therefore to work out the selling price it's times 150 divided by 100. To get the total sales, we're going to add each one of those. Now we can calculate the gross profit, take the credit side minus the debit side. Question number 4, 3.2.4. Jolly wants to know how quickly she is converting her stock into cash. Provide figures or calculation to assess this. So here, have a look at how financial indicators is incorporated into inventories. How quickly she is converting her stock into cash means that we need to look at how many times per year do we need to change our stock. To calculate that, we have to take the cost of sales divided by the average stock. Cost of sales, we've calculated. I can use my trading account to find all the information that I'm looking for. There's my opening stock plus my closing stock, beginning plus end divided by 2 equals the average inventory. So this means we have to change it 12.5 times per year. You could also use the number of units instead of using the amounts. To use the number of units, we're going to take the total number of units sold, beginning plus end divided by 2, and that equals 13.5 times. The next part of the question says, explain to Jolly if she should be satisfied with this or not. So if we look at 13.11 times or 12.5 times per year, yes, The stock turnover rate is 12.5 times per year, which means the stock is kept on average 29 days. If you take 365 divided by 12.5, you will get 29 days. Or if you use the number of units, the 13 and 11.11 times, you have to take 365 divided by that. It means that estimate or it's kept for 28 days. Jet skis are not cheap and are seasonal. It is not cheap to maintain, and due to fuel costs, it is expensive to use. Question 3.2.5 is calculate the stock holding period for each jet ski. So this means if we're now going to look at X thousand double, to calculate the stock holding period, you have to take your average stock divided by cost of sales times 365 days. Looking at X double, opening stock plus closing stock divided by 2 equals the average divided by cost of sales times 365 means on average 33.4 days. Looking at X700 Lite, it's my opening stock plus closing stock divided by 2 divided by cost of sales times 365, which means 21.3 days. X2000 Power Up, remember now, there's no opening stock. So we're only going to take the closing stock divided by cost of sales times 365. That means 61.1 days, which is very high compared to the other two. Again, take note how I can use the trading account, the workings which I've done right in the beginning to solve all of these questions. A reminder on an alternative option that you can use, instead of using the amounts, we use the number of units. So it means that it's every single time the opening stock plus the closing stock in units times a half or divided by 2 divided by the number of units sold. Question 3.2.6. Jolie requires your advice on the 3 different models of jet skis in which she's trading. So we need to look at each one of these items individually, identify a potential problem and give advice. So if we look at X1000 double, I'm going to circle things that I've identified. Closing stock, there's only 2 left over. If I look at the gross profit, it's the least out of all of them. The markup percentage is 50%. So what is a potential problem is that there's only 2 items left over. We sold 98% of the stock. To calculate that, you have to take the number of units that were sold divided by the number of units available, and percentage is always times 100. We do not have enough stock to meet the demand. The stock still needs to be imported from Mexico. Remember, Mexico is our supplier. So it's going to take time to get that stock onto our premises. This will lead to loss of potential income because if we don't have stock, they might go somewhere else. The gross profit is the least between all of them. So what advice can we give? We need to order more stock as it seems to be in demand for this particular model. We could increase the markup percentage to increase the gross profit. If you look at the gross profit there, it's 45%, which is the least out of all of the other ones, all of the other models. So I can increase the gross profit. This is a popular brand, as long as it's still below what my competitors are asking. If we look at X700 Lite, again we're going to circle if there is any concerns. So if I look at this, the markup percentage is 70%, which is the highest. We have 8 plus 185, that is the amount available. We sold 180, we've got 13 units left over. If I look at the gross profit, yes, the gross profit is the highest out of all of them. So looking at this, we sold 93% of the stock, which means that there's 7% still left over. The markup percentage is the highest at 70%, and we're making the most money from that. So what is the problem? Although this is making the most money, 7% of the stock is still left over. We could reduce the markup to increase sales or offer discount or promotions. Could also advertise this module more. If we look at X2000 Power Up, we're going to circle a problem. 8 was returned, which is the most out of all of them. If I look at my stock, we had purchased 150 from the suppliers. We sold 127, which means that we still got 23 left over. Looking at this, we sold 84.7% of the stock. We have to take 127 divided by 150, the number of units available. 15.3% of the stock is left over, which is double the amount of the other two models. The stock is kept on average 66.1 days, which is too long. Remember when we calculated that, I said it's double the amount of the other two models. Most returns by customers. 8 jet skis were returned by the customers. So if we take 8 divided by 127, it means 6.3%. What we need to take note of as well, there's no opening stock, which means that this could be a new module that was introduced, hence the low percentage sales compared to the other two modules. So another thing, this is the most expensive module which caters to more premium buyers. So if we look at what advice, should investigate the reason for the returns by the customers and talk to the suppliers. Should possibly look at a similar type of jet ski from a different supplier which is cheaper. Should also look at the demand and buy less stock so that less money is tied up in stock. Having excess stock will increase the cost for security and storage space. Now we can also look at, should spend more on advertising on the specific target market, could reduce the markup percentage. So these are advice that I could give, which I've identified now with potential problems. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to look at activity 4, where we're going to look at combined activities, a mixture between weighted average, specific identification, and FIFO. I want to leave you with this quote: teachers can open the door, but you must enter yourself. Have a wonderful day.